Home is supposed to mean safety, a locked door, a warm light, a space that's yours. But what happens when the lock isn't enough? When footsteps echo in rooms that should be empty? When a door you closed is standing open? When the silence feels like it's listening? A home invasion doesn't start with broken glass. It starts with the moment you realize someone else is already inside. The midnight knock. This was something that happened a few years ago. It was back when Scott was in college, during his senior year. For that school year, he lived in a small and old house a little ways off campus. It was a pretty typical college neighborhood with a bunch of other similar houses. Scott shared the two-bedroom house with one other person, his roommate named Jason. They had met each other in college and were friends. An event took place a few months into the school year. Scott and Jason were both always coming and going from the house. They each had classes at all sorts of random times, and both worked part-time jobs as well. One night, Scott came back home to the house after a late class. He had been gone basically all day since the morning, spending the time in between his classes studying in buildings around campus. After arriving back, he parked out front on the side of the street and walked up to the front door. He went inside and was going to go upstairs and change. However, right when he got inside, something seemed off. The first room in the house was the living room, and it looked a little bit messed up. Also, the door that led to the basement was wide open and they always kept it closed. Scott knew Jason was gone at work until later, and of course, he figured Jason was responsible for the mess in the open door. It wasn't really like him though, because they were both pretty clean and picked up after themselves, but obviously it couldn't be anybody else. Scott thought maybe Jason had left in a hurry and had been looking for something. Either way, it wasn't too big of a deal. Scott just picked up the few things that were on the floor, then went over and closed the door. He was going to go upstairs and change, so he walked up and went to his bedroom. He took a quick shower, changed clothes, and then went back downstairs to get something to eat. But after going back downstairs, Scott saw that the basement door was once again open. This really creeped him out. He had a bad feeling immediately, but thought maybe Jason had returned home early from work. He called out Jason's name, asking if he was back. Jason obviously hadn't gone upstairs, or Scott would have seen or heard him. But when he called out, there was no response. Scott decided to go and look in the basement. The house had an old, unfinished basement. They mostly didn't have anything down there except for the washing machine, dryer, and a few boxes. He took 1 or 2 steps down the stairs. As soon as he did, he immediately saw somebody down there. It was dark, so he didn't get a good look. It appeared to be a man, and someone Scott didn't recognize. The figure was just barely in his sight. After seeing him, Scott could hardly believe it. The man started to turn, seemingly to look at him. But right away, Scott turned around and quickly went back upstairs. He closed the door behind him. He ran upstairs to his bedroom. He closed the door and locked it behind him. After that, he got out his phone and dialed 911. Right as this was happening, Scott started to hear the guy walking around downstairs. He spoke with the dispatcher explaining the situation, but right after, he heard the man start to walk upstairs. He just hoped the intruder wouldn't try to get into his bedroom. Scott's room was the first one at the top of the stairs to the right. Jason's room was a little ways down to the left and his door was shut. The only other room up there was the bathroom. After the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, almost instantly they were right outside Scott's door. He was nervous. Then they turned and tried the handle. Scott was thankful his door had a lock. When the door didn't open, the man walked further down the hallway. Scott heard him opening Jason's door, which was unlocked. Then the man went inside. This really creeped Scott out because whoever this guy was knew Scott must have seen him. Instead of leaving, he chose to go upstairs and seemingly go after him. Scott did his best to stay calm, just hoping the police would arrive shortly. The man stayed inside Jason's bedroom for 2 or 3 minutes. Then he came back out. He lingered near the bathroom for a few seconds. Then he turned and headed back towards Scott's room. This time, though, he walked past and went back down the stairs. After going back down, Scott heard him walking a little more. Then the sound of the front door opened and shut. Scott figured the man had left, but he still didn't leave his bedroom. Just a few minutes after that, the cops arrived. He went down and told them what happened. They looked around, but the man was gone. Scott called Jason and told him about it. Jason came home a while later, and unfortunately, a few things were stolen from his bedroom. They never found out who did it. Scott was pretty sure whoever the man was had just walked right in. They hadn't done a very good job of locking their door because they were always coming and going. But after that, they did. Shadows watching. This was something that happened back when Kyle was a kid. He was 12 years old and he lived with his parents in a pretty average house. It took place during the summertime. He was home from school and he liked to play video games. On this particular night, his parents had gone to bed and Kyle stayed up pretty late gaming. By this point, it was probably around 1 o'clock in the morning. He was inside his bedroom and just about every light in the house was off, except for a small lamp on his desk. He didn't have headphones in, but his video games were at a pretty low volume. Kyle's bedroom was right off the living room, and the front door was connected to that. As he sat there playing video games, he suddenly heard the sound of someone trying to open the front door. It took him by surprise, and instantly he grew suspicious. He didn't really consider their neighborhood to have much crime, and nothing like that had ever happened before as far as he knew. He paused his game and sat there listening. He heard whoever it was try the door again, and then things went quiet for a few moments. Kyle decided to get up and look. He quietly walked out of his bedroom and into the dark living room. There was just a little bit of light coming in from the windows, which had shades mostly covering them. He walked over and looked through the front window. When he did, he saw nothing at all. Whoever had been at the door was gone. He didn't know who it was or why they were there. He thought maybe somebody had accidentally gone to the wrong house. Either way, they were gone now, which made him feel a lot better. Kyle walked back into his bedroom, sat down, and continued gaming. He wasn't really tired yet. He was already in the habit of staying up late most nights playing video games. But less than 5 minutes later, he heard another noise. It was a strange sound, one he couldn't even describe. Not quite a scraping, but similar. It was coming from the back side of the house where the back door was. When he heard it, the same fear from earlier crept back. Was somebody trying to break in? He was honestly too scared to go and look. He stayed in his bedroom just listening to the noise and hoping it would stop. He tried thinking of logical explanations, but nothing made sense. The noise continued much longer than when the person had tried the front door. After several minutes, Kyle didn't know what to do. He considered his options. He could go and wake his parents. He could use the phone to call the police, or he could go see what was making the noise. But he didn't have a cell phone, and there wasn't one in his room either. To make a call, he'd have to go to the kitchen where the landline was. Ironically, that was also where the back door was. But before he could do anything, he suddenly heard the sound of the back door opening. It was one of the scariest moments of his life. As soon as it happened, his instincts kicked in. He bolted from his bedroom, ran down the hallway, and rushed into his parents' room. He woke them up and said that he heard somebody enter the house. His dad got up and walked to the doorway. He quietly opened it and seemed to be listening. He must have heard the intruder walking or making some sound. He told them someone was inside and told Kyle's mom to call the police. Then, his dad shouted loudly that he had a gun. He didn't actually have one with him, but he was clearly trying to scare the person off. Surprisingly, it must have worked, because about 15 seconds later, he said he heard the back door close. They stayed in the room until the police arrived. Afterward, Kyle and his parents had to talk to the officers and answer questions. Kyle told them everything that had happened. Unfortunately, he never got a look at the person. He couldn't tell if it was a male, female, or anything else. The police tested for fingerprints and told them there had been a few reported break-ins in the area. Luckily, nothing was stolen from their house. After that night, nothing like it ever happened again. Kyle was glad he had been up late playing video games because it meant he could alert his parents quickly. The wrong turn. This was something that happened back when Travis was living alone. He had been on his own for several years, in a house a little ways from the city. It happened a couple of years ago. One night, he was just relaxing, sitting on the couch and watching some TV. Travis' living room had the couch at the back side of it, right next to the main window. This window looked out to the front yard and street. As he watched TV, he would occasionally glance out the window. It was a nice and quiet night. By then it was past 10 p.m. and there was rarely much traffic on the street other than neighbors. To get to the nearest really busy street, you had to take about 3 quiet ones. He remembered noticing headlights coming down the street out of the corner of his eye. When he looked over, he saw the car. It drove by very slowly, a dark-colored 4-door sedan. It looked a little older as well, but Travis didn't recognize it as belonging to any of the neighbors. The car soon passed by and kept on going down the street. He turned his attention back to the TV. But about a minute later, he heard the car again. When he looked back to the street, he noticed the same car driving by once more. It was as if it had taken a lap, going to the next street over and then circling back to his. This time, the car slowly passed by his house again, except now it went even slower. And then it pulled over to the side of the road a little ways past his place right in front of the house across the street, and one over to the left. Travis assumed it might be a friend of whoever lived there. But after the car parked, he saw the doors open and 3 men got out. They were pretty far away, so he couldn't see details clearly. Still, from what he could make out, all 3 appeared to be wearing dark clothing. And not just that, but ski masks as well. He couldn't believe his eyes. Things got worse when he watched the men cross the street and start walking into his yard. Travis quickly ducked down on the couch. He glanced over and made sure the front door was locked. It was. Then, he literally crawled across the living room so they wouldn't see him. He made it to the hallway, and then he heard the men trying the front door. When it didn't open, he heard a knock which he had no intention of answering. About a minute later, there was noise at the back door. First someone trying the handle, then knocking. Travis was positioned just inside the hallway near his bedroom. He knew he had enough reason to call the cops. Pulling out his phone, he dialed 911. He didn't want to go into his bedroom or the guest room because he thought the men might try to break into them. And as he was on the phone with the police, he heard a knock at his bedroom window. The 3 men all seemed to be at different spots around the house. Not sure where else to go, Travis decided to hide in the hallway closet. It mostly stored blankets and other items. He slipped inside, closed the door, and covered himself. After being told that police would arrive in a few minutes, he hung up. He hoped desperately that the men wouldn't break in. But just moments later, the sound of shattering glass from the back window confirmed otherwise. They were inside. He didn't know who they were or why they wanted to enter his house. Soon, he heard footsteps moving around and the men talking to one another. Travis couldn't make out most of the words, but one of them asked another if anybody was home. The footsteps came closer. Someone entered his bedroom, then the guest room. They got just feet away from the closet he was hiding in. Travis held his breath, convinced they were about to open it, but they never did. The intruders continued walking around, speaking in low voices. To Travis, the minutes dragged on like hours. Then at one point, he heard one of the men say the word, police. He didn't catch the context, but he wondered if officers had arrived. The tone wasn't alarmed or panicked, almost casual, but after that, the men moved toward the back door and quickly left. Silence followed. About 30 seconds to a minute later, there was a knock at the front door. Travis was certain this time it was the police. He left the closet and ran to the door. He didn't see the intruders anywhere as he did. On the steps stood an officer. Travis opened the door and explained everything. The police searched his house and property. The men's car was still parked on the street, and within an hour, the suspects were located several blocks away. Relief washed over him knowing they were caught. That was by far the scariest thing that had ever happened to Travis. He was grateful he had stayed hidden. Hollow basement. Scott had a 3-bedroom house that he lived in by himself. It had 2 floors and a basement, and he really enjoyed living there. The neighborhood was nice as well, and he had gotten to know several of the neighbors. Last year, though, something terrifying had taken place. Scott worked pretty standard hours, although he had converted one of his bedrooms into an office to get extra work done. One day while he was gone at work, he got a phone call from his neighbor who lived directly across the street. His name was Dan, and he was retired. Dan was a really nice guy, but he did not usually call Scott. Scott wondered what was going on, and when he answered, Dan asked if he was expecting anybody at his house that day. Dan knew Scott was gone, because his car, which he drove every day, was not in the driveway. Scott told him no. Why? Dan explained that he had seen a man enter Scott's yard and stand at the front door for a while. Then the guy had gone around into the backyard. Dan said it looked really suspicious to him, and he wanted to call Scott about it. He also mentioned that the man had gone into the backyard about 5 minutes ago, and he hadn't seen him since. He asked if Scott wanted him to call the police. Scott told him yes, because he felt helpless being stuck at work. He figured it would be best for the police to come out and look around. It was strange for something like this to be happening in broad daylight, so Dan called the police, and he told Scott he would call back with an update. Scott sat at his desk hoping that nobody would break into his place. About 30 minutes later or so, Dan called him back. Dan said that the police had looked around but figured the man had left. They said all of Scott's doors were locked and windows appeared closed and fine. Nothing seemed out of place, and after searching both the front and backyard, nobody was located. They figured the individual might have tried to enter and then pass by to another property. Dan had never seen the guy come back around and leave. He also never saw where exactly the guy had come from. Scott felt a little bit better, but he was also really creeped out by the whole thing. So he left work and went home about an hour later. When he got back, he pulled into the driveway and walked around his house. He wanted to see things for himself, and everything seemed fine. Then he walked over to the front door and went inside, starting his normal after-work routine. He first went upstairs to change, but when he got to his bedroom, he opened the door and immediately saw something for a brief second. It was so fast he didn't know what it was at first, but then he realized that somebody was hiding behind his bed. He had just barely seen part of them. Scott didn't say anything. He simply left the room, ran back downstairs and left his house. He got into his car and called 911. He stayed there in his car for the next few minutes as he talked to the police. As he sat waiting, he saw a guy come running out of his front door and then out into the street. The man ran down the street until he was out of sight. The police arrived several minutes later. Scott was able to give them a decent description of the guy. They searched the house in case there were multiple people, but it was just the one man. He ended up being located later that evening. Scott didn't know who he was, and he didn't know why the man had chosen his house. In Scott's opinion, his place didn't stand out at all. He just hoped nothing like that would ever happen again. The stranger inside. This story happened back when Connor was in high school. It was summertime, and he was going into his senior year, living with his parents at home. His older brother was off at college at the time, working a job, so it was just Connor and his parents. He worked a part-time job at a local restaurant to make money, so he worked mostly nights and weekends. One night, he arrived home from work pretty late. This was typical for him, getting home around midnight or so. He would eat something, unwind for a bit, and then usually be sleeping by 2 a.m. Of course, this was just a routine on nights that he worked late. He remembered working 2 nights in a row. After arriving back home from work the first night, he got inside, changed, and then sat on the living room couch to have some food. His parents had already gone to bed by then. Connor was just on his phone, half watching TV as well. At one point, he got up to get something, and when he returned to the living room, he noticed a car driving by out the front window. The strange thing about it was the speed of the car. It was driving extremely slow. It wasn't stopped, but just going really, really slowly. Connor found this odd. The car passed by the house and kept going. He stayed curious and continued to watch it. The car was white, had 4 doors, and appeared to be an early 2000s model. He didn't recognize it. The car went further down the road and then appeared to turn around. After this, it came back down the street, except much faster than before. Connor assumed it was somebody who was lost, but the car returned a while later, maybe 20 minutes after he had first seen it. The car drove slowly down the street again and went all the way down. Then, it came back once again going extremely slow. Connor didn't really know what was going on. After that, he did not see the car again for the rest of the time that he was awake. Soon, he went to bed and didn't think anything more of it. The next day, he worked basically the exact same shift at the restaurant. After getting home from work again, his parents had already gone to bed. Connor sat down to have some food, and like the previous night not long after, he noticed the same car driving down the street again. This was strange, but this time, the car ended up pulling into their driveway. That was really weird. He wondered what exactly was going on here. After the car parked, Connor kept watching out of the window. A man and a woman both got out. He didn't recognize them, but they seemed to walk directly to the back of the house. This was alarming. Connor walked over to the back side of the house, and as soon as he got there, he saw the man and woman approaching the rear door that led out to the patio. He quickly moved away. Then he heard the sudden sound of glass breaking. When he heard this, Connor ran into his bedroom. He grabbed his phone and hit 911. As soon as he did, he heard the man and woman both walking inside. He really didn't want them to come toward his room. Connor was afraid they might be dangerous, and his bedroom door had no lock. They weren't approaching yet, but he feared that they would. Then he had an idea. He quietly turned on the TV in his bedroom and put it to YouTube. Then he searched for an alarm sound, turned the volume all the way up, and played it. It sounded as though the house alarm had gone off, except his family didn't have one at all. This seemed to actually work because he soon heard the back door open less than a minute later. Connor then went to his parents, who had already woken up from the noise. He told them what happened, and the police were already on the way. They arrived probably about 5 minutes later. Connor told them what he could. The man and woman were both gone, and unfortunately, he didn't know if they were ever found. Connor was just glad that his alarm idea worked.